Some people don't belong in first class, the flight attendant sneered, placing a drink in front of the wrong passenger. Jasmine Bennett's pen froze mid-note. Across from her, Aaliyah Washington raised an eyebrow, calm but unyielding. Cameras clicked softly as nearby passengers sensed the tension. "Excuse me?" Jasmine asked, her tone deceptively polite. The attendant smiled tightly, unaware of the storm she'd just triggered. Because the two women she'd just insulted weren't ordinary travelers. They were the new executive directors of the very airline she worked for, sent to evaluate how their crews treated passengers. And today, she'd failed spectacularly. Aaliyah Washington, 34, and Jasmine Bennett, 36, weren't strangers to being underestimated. Their friendship began 15 years ago at Stanford University, where they were often the only black women in their business classes, both from working-class neighborhoods in Oakland. They had won scholarships based on their academic excellence and leadership potential. "We used to quiz each other until 3:00 in the morning." Aaliyah would later recall her specialty was operations management, while Jasmine excelled in human resources and organizational psychology. What bonded them wasn't just their academic interests, but their shared experiences navigating predominantly white spaces. Throughout college, they faced subtle and not so subtle racism. Professors who seemed surprised by their articulate presentations, study groups that accidentally forgot to include them, career counselors who steered them toward less competitive fields despite their top grades. But adversity only strengthened their resolve. After graduation, they both secured internships at Horizon Airways, a major American carrier. The internships were grueling early mornings, late nights, and constant pressure to perform better than their peers just to be considered equal. "We had to be twice as good to get half as far," Jasmine once told a group of black college students she was mentoring. "But that made us exceptional. Their hard work paid off." Over 12 years, they climbed through the ranks of Horizon Airways. Aaliyah became known for her innovative approach to operational efficiency, while Jasmine developed groundbreaking training programs that improved employee retention and satisfaction. Their latest achievement came just last month, dual promotions to the executive level. Aaliyah was now Executive Director of Customer Experience, while Jasmine took over as Executive Director of Cabin Crew Training. For the first time in Horizon's 70-year history, two black women held executive positions simultaneously. Their first major task was to conduct an incognito assessment of the airline service quality. They would travel on several flights without announcing their positions, experiencing the airline as regular customers would. This way, we'll see the unfiltered reality Aaliyah had suggested in the planning meeting. No special treatment, no performance for the bosses. Rebecca Taylor had been a senior flight attendant with Horizon Airways for 15 years, born to an affluent family in Connecticut. She had initially taken the job as a way to travel before settling into something serious. But she found she enjoyed the authority that came with the position and the deference passengers showed her. What she didn't enjoy were the company's recent diversity initiatives. In the break room, she would complain to anyone who would listen. "They're lowering the standards just to hit some quota. It's reverse discrimination, if you ask me." Her colleague Blake Stevens usually nodded along. At 32, he was newer to the company, but eager to align himself with experienced crew members like Rebecca. What neither of them knew was that Horizon Airways had recently settled 3 discrimination lawsuits filed by passengers of color who reported mistreatment. The new CEO, Martin Fitzgerald, had made it his mission to transform the company culture, starting from the top down. "We're not just changing policies," he announced at the company town hall. "We're changing hearts and minds. And if some people can't change, they'll need to find employment elsewhere." It was in this context that Aaliyah and Jasmine boarded flight 1427 from San Francisco to New York, an early morning departure on a Monday in June. They were dressed in professional attire, tailored pantsuits with simple gold jewelry, but wore no visible company identification except for small gold pins on their blazer lapels, a subtle marker only recognizable to those familiar with executive accessories. They were about to experience firsthand exactly what Martin Fitzgerald was trying to change. Aaliyah and Jasmine arrived at Gate C 12 40 minutes before boarding began. They had deliberately come early to observe pre-boarding procedures as part of their assessment. Standing discreetly near the counter, they watched as the gate agents processed passengers with various issues, seat changes, upgrade requests, boarding pass problems. Notice how that agent spent 5 minutes helping the older white gentleman, but barely 30 seconds with the Hispanic family, Jasmine whispered. Aaliyah nodded, making a note in her phone. Definitely something to address in training. When first-class boarding was announced, they gathered their carry-ons and approached the jet bridge. The gate agent smiled professionally and scanned their boarding passes without a second glance. Once on board, they were greeted by Rebecca Taylor, whose smile flickered momentarily as she registered their appearance. "First class is to the left," she said, her tone carrying a hint of surprise. "Yes, thank you," Aaliyah replied warmly. "Suts 2A and 2B." They settled into their plush leather seats, placing their bags in the overhead compartments. Around them, other first-class passengers, predominantly white businessmen, were already being offered pre-departure beverages. After 10 minutes, when no one had approached them, Jasmine pressed the call button. Rebecca appeared, her expression tight. "Could we get some champagne, please?" Jasmine asked politely. "We'll be serving after takeoff," Rebecca replied curtly, despite the fact that the passenger across the aisle was already sipping from a flute. As she walked away, they heard her mutter to Blake, who was arranging items in the galley, probably using affirmative action. "Miles, we're going to have to start keeping some standards in first class." Blake chuckled uncomfortably, glancing back at them. Throughout the boarding process, Rebecca repeatedly overlooked them. She helped a white passenger place his bag in the overhead bin directly above Aaliyah, but didn't offer the same assistance when Jasmine struggled with her laptop case. She distributed hot towels to every first-class passenger except them until Aaliyah had to explicitly ask for them. When the safety demonstration began, Rebecca positioned herself near their row, her eyes scanning their seatbelts and tray tables with extra scrutiny. Once the plane reached cruising altitude and meal service, Rebecca approached them with an exaggerated, condescending smile. Since you ladies might be new to first class, she began speaking slowly, as if explaining to children. "We offer complimentary premium beverages and a 3-course meal. The menu is in your seat pocket. Do you need help understanding any of the options?" From across the aisle, an older white passenger named Harold Whitman looked up from his newspaper, frowning slightly at Rebecca's tone. "Actually," Aaliyah replied evenly, "I'll have the grilled salmon and a glass of the Chardonnay." "Same for me," Jasmine added. "And some still water with lemon, please." Rebecca nodded stiffly and moved on to the next passengers, where her demeanor instantly warmed. They overheard her chatting amiably with Mr. Whitman about wine regions in California. As she returned to the galley, she leaned down to another passenger, a middle-aged white man named Willis Bradshaw, and said in a stage whisper, "Some people might be more comfortable in economy with others like them. Don't you think?" Bradshaw nodded with a smirk, glancing back at Aaliyah and Jasmine. Aaliyah tensed her hand, gripping the armrest. Jasmine placed her hand over Aaliyah's and gave a subtle shake of her head. They exchanged glances, communicating silently as they had done countless times throughout their careers. They would document everything but maintain their cover for now. Other passengers had varying reactions. Harold Whitman shifted uncomfortably, clearly having overheard. A young Asian American woman in row 3 looked down at her book, pretending not to notice. A few seemed completely oblivious to the tension building in the cabin. Rebecca's behavior wasn't just unprofessional. It was a textbook display of the discrimination issues that had plagued Horizon Airways and had led directly to Aaliyah and Jasmine's promotions. And it was about to get worse. 2 hours into the 5-hour flight, Jasmine opened her laptop to review some documents. She placed her half-empty water glass in the holder and began typing notes about their observations. So far, Rebecca approached with a coffee pot, serving passengers on the opposite side of the aisle. As she reached across to fill Harold Whitman's cup, her elbow accidentally bumped Jasmine's water glass, sending water cascading onto her keyboard. "Oh, Rebecca," exclaimed, with obviously faint concern. "I'm so sorry about that." She grabbed a cocktail napkin, not the cloth napkin she had given other passengers, and tossed it toward Jasmine, who was already standing to avoid the water dripping onto her slacks. "My laptop," Jasmine said quickly, closing it and turning it upside down to drain the water. "I had important documents open." "These things happen," Rebecca replied dismissively. "Maybe keep your beverage further from your electronics next time." Harold Whitman, witnessing the entire exchange, spoke up. "That was clearly your doing, not hers. You should file an incident report for the damaged equipment." Rebecca's smile tightened. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I'm handling this." "Actually," Jasmine said calmly, "I believe standard procedure for damaged passenger property is Form IR-27 submitted to the purser before landing." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem very familiar with our procedures." "I fly often," Jasmine replied smoothly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Rebecca's face. She glanced at their boarding passes sticking out of the seat pocket, noticing their last names for the first time, Washington and Bennett. Something tugged at her memory. "I'll check if we have those forms available," she said, less confidently now. As Rebecca retreated to the galley, Harold Whitman leaned across the aisle. That was completely unprofessional. "I'm Harold Whitman, CEO of Whitman Tech Solutions. If you need a witness for any complaint, please take my card." "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," Aaliyah said, accepting his business card. "We appreciate your integrity." Harold nodded. "I've seen this kind of thing too often. My daughter-in-law is black, and the stories she tells me." He shook his head. "It changes your perspective." Meanwhile, in the galley, Rebecca was frantically whispering to Blake, "Washington and Bennett, weren't those the names in that company memo last week about new executive appointments?" Blake shrugged. "I don't usually read those corporate announcements." Rebecca pulled out her phone and quickly searched through her work emails. There it was. Horizon Airways appoints Aaliyah Washington as Executive Director of Customer Experience and Jasmine Bennett as Executive Director of Cabin Crew Training. The small headshot in the email matched the women in seats 2A and 2B. Her face palled. Back at their seats, Aaliyah was documenting the water incident while Jasmine attempted to salvage her laptop. "This reminds me of that conference in Dallas," Aaliyah murmured, referring to a time when a hotel staff member had accidentally spilled coffee on Jasmine's presentation materials minutes before she was due to speak. "Or that client meeting in Boston," Jasmine replied, recalling when they were mistaken for administrative staff rather than the executive consultants they were. Throughout their careers, they had developed a strategy for handling such situations. Document everything, remain professional, and address the behavior through proper channels rather than direct confrontation. They knew that showing anger would only reinforce negative stereotypes about angry black women. "We're not just doing this for ourselves anymore," Aaliyah had said when they accepted their executive roles. "We're changing things for everyone who comes after us." As they whispered about their next steps, they didn't notice Morgan Davis, the chief purser, observing from the galley. Morgan, a 30-year veteran with Horizon Airways, had been watching Rebecca's behavior with growing concern. Unlike Rebecca, Morgan believed in the company's diversity initiatives and had mentored numerous young flight attendants from various backgrounds. Morgan approached their row. "Excuse me, ladies. I couldn't help noticing the accident with the water." "Is everything all right with your laptop? I hope so," Jasmine replied. "It's company property, actually." Morgan's eyes flickered with recognition. "I see. Well, I'll make sure an incident report is filed properly. Can I get you anything else in the meantime?" "We're fine, thank you," Aaliyah said with a smile. As Morgan returned to the galley, she pulled Rebecca aside. "What's going on with the passengers in 2A and 2B?" Rebecca's face was a mask of innocence. "Nothing." "Why? Because I've been watching you treat them differently since takeoff," Morgan said quietly. "And I don't like what I'm seeing." Before Rebecca could respond, Willis Bradshaw pressed his call button. Rebecca hurried over, grateful for the interruption. Bradshaw leaned close to her. "Is there any way I could be moved further from them?" He nodded toward Aaliyah and Jasmine. "They don't seem like they belong up here, if you know what I mean." Rebecca should have refused this inappropriate request. Instead, she nodded sympathetically. I completely understand, sir. Let me see what I can do. What she didn't realize was that Aaliyah and Jasmine could hear every word. And they weren't the only ones. Harold Whitman's expression darkened, and he made a note in his phone. The tension in the first-class cabin was building toward an inevitable breaking point. Rebecca returned to the galley, her mind racing. If these women were indeed the new executive directors, her behavior could cost her the job she'd held for 15 years. She needed to verify their identities without revealing her suspicions. She pulled out the passenger manifest and scanned it more carefully. There they were. Washington Aaliyah and Bennett Jasmine. First-class seats 2A and 2B. Listed occupations, corporate executives, Horizon Airways. Her stomach dropped. How had she missed this? The company-wide email had included their photos. She should have recognized them immediately. "Blake," she hissed, grabbing her colleague's arm. "Those women in 2A and 2B, they're the new executive directors, the ones overseeing cabin crew operations." Blake's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you sure the ones from the announcement last month?" "Positive? And I've been?" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You've been treating them like they don't belong in first class." Blake finished for her, stepping back slightly. "I didn't say anything, but I noticed." Rebecca's mind flashed back to every dismissive comment, every microaggression, every preferential treatment she'd shown to other passengers, all potentially witnessed by her new bosses. "I need to fix this," she said desperately. "I'm not sure you can," Blake replied already, distancing himself from her actions. Rebecca took a deep breath and approached Aaliyah and Jasmine with a completely transformed demeanor. Her previous coldness was replaced with exaggerated warmth. "Ladies, I am so sorry about the water incident earlier. I've brought you some fresh napkins and our premium snack selection. Can I get you anything else? More champagne?" Perhaps a warm cookie. Aaliyah and Jasmine exchanged glances immediately, recognizing the sudden change. "No, thank you. We're fine," Aaliyah replied professionally. "Are you sure we have those noise-cancelling headphones available? Or perhaps a hot towel refresh? I want to make sure you're comfortable." "We're quite comfortable," Jasmine said with a pointed look. "But thank you for your renewed attention." Rebecca retreated her face, burning with humiliation. They knew that she knew, and her transparent attempt to compensate for her earlier behavior only highlighted her guilt. Morgan Davis, observing this exchange, approached Rebecca in the galley. "Rebecca, what's going on? You've completely changed your attitude toward those passengers." Before Rebecca could answer, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Cabin crew prepare for descent in 20 minutes. Also, I've been informed we have special VIP company executives on board today. Please ensure they receive our highest level of service." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "The passengers in 2A and 2B. Are they company executives?" Rebecca nodded miserably. "And you've been treating them poorly because Rebecca had no response." Meanwhile, Blake was frantically trying to ingratiate himself with Aaliyah and Jasmine. "Can I refresh your drinks before landing? Or perhaps you'd like some warm nuts. I personally selected the best ones from our supply." "We didn't seem to warrant your attention earlier," Aaliyah observed coolly. "What changed?" Blake stammered. "I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "How interesting," Jasmine replied. "Perhaps you could extend that courtesy to all passengers, regardless of who you think they might be." Blake retreated, thoroughly chastened in the aisle. Willis Bradshaw was attempting to make conversation with Harold Whitman. "Can you believe they let just anyone into first class these days? Standards have really slipped." Harold fixed him with a cold stare. "Actually, I find the only people lowering the standards in this cabin are those who judge others based on their appearance." Now I have a question for all of you watching this story unfold. Have you ever witnessed someone's demeanor change completely once they realized the person they were disrespecting held a position of power? Comment number 1, if you believe Rebecca deserves to be fired immediately for her behavior. Comment number 2, if you think she deserves a second chance with proper training. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice in the workplace. What do you think will happen when the plane lands? Will Rebecca face immediate consequences, Or will Aaliyah and Jasmine handle the situation differently? Let's find out as our story continues. As Flight 1427 began its final descent into JFK International Airport, the tension in the first-class cabin was palpable. Rebecca moved mechanically through the pre-landing checks, avoiding eye contact with Aaliyah and Jasmine. Blake followed her lead, his usual confidence deflated. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I'd like to extend a special welcome to our distinguished passengers today, Executive Directors Washington and Bennett from our corporate headquarters. On behalf of all the crew, we're honored to have you aboard." A murmur rippled through the first-class cabin as passengers glanced curiously toward Aaliyah and Jasmine. Rebecca froze in the aisle, the announcement confirming her worst fears. For the first time since boarding, Aaliyah and Jasmine removed their blazers, revealing the distinctive gold pins on their lapels, the symbol of Horizon Airways' executive leadership. Rebecca's face drained of color as she recognized the pins, the same ones pictured in the company handbook section on executive management. The pins she'd somehow missed noticing earlier, despite serving them for hours. Harold Whitman smiled knowingly from across the aisle. Willis Bradshaw suddenly became intensely interested in his phone, avoiding everyone's gaze. As the realization dawned on other passengers, Jasmine turned to Aaliyah. "Remember our first flight together as college students when the flight attendant assumed we were in the wrong seats?" "Full circle moment," Aaliyah replied quietly. Rebecca's mind raced through every dismissive comment, every preferential treatment she'd shown other passengers, every microaggression she'd committed. She remembered suggesting they might be more comfortable in economy with others like them. She recalled the water accident with Jasmine's laptop. She thought about her whispered comments to Blake and Willis Bradshaw, all witnessed by her new bosses, the very women who now oversaw cabin crew operations and customer experience. The plane touched down with a gentle thud. As passengers prepared to deplane, Rebecca approached Aaliyah and Jasmine with trembling hands. "Miss Washington, Miss Bennett." She began, her voice barely audible over the aircraft's engines. "I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstandings today if I gave the impression. Miss Taylor is it," Jasmine interrupted, reading Rebecca's name tag. "I believe we should continue this conversation off the aircraft." "Of course," Rebecca stammered. "I just want you to know that not normally what Miss Taylor," Aaliyah asked her, voice level, but firm, not normally dismissive of black passengers, not normally suggesting people like us belong in economy, not normally providing substandard service based on assumptions about who deserves respect. Rebecca's face crumpled. "Please, I have a perfect record with the airline. 15 years without a complaint. This is all a huge misunderstanding." At that moment, Harold Whitman stood up from his seat. "Excuse me. I believe I can provide some context to what happened today, if that would be helpful." He handed Jasmine his business card. "Harold Whitman, CEO of Whitman Tech Solutions. I witnessed the entire interaction from my seat." "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," Jasmine said, accepting his card. "We may be in touch." As passengers began to deplane, Blake approached hurriedly. "Directors, I want to express my deepest apologies for not intervening earlier. I should have spoken up, and I take full responsibility for my inaction." "Yes, you should have." Aaliyah agreed. Bystanders who remained silent in the face of discrimination are part of the problem. The chief purser, Morgan Davis, approached and introduced herself properly. "Directors Washington and Bennett. I'm Morgan Davis, chief purser on this flight. I've been informed of some concerns regarding service today. I want to assure you that I'm taking this very seriously, and I will be fully cooperative with any investigation." Jasmine nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Miss Davis. Your professionalism is noted." As they gathered their belongings, Jasmine turned to Aaliyah, ready for what comes next. Aaliyah nodded. "We didn't get these positions just to enjoy the perks. We're here to make real change." When they stepped off the plane, they found Terrence Reynolds, the regional manager for East Coast operations, waiting at the gate. His expression made it clear that word of the incident had already reached him. Directors Washington and Bennett, he greeted them formally. "Welcome to New York. I understand there was an incident on board your flight today. We have a private room ready to discuss the matter. Behind them, Rebecca emerged from the jetway, her confident demeanor completely shattered. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The airport conference room was clinically bright, its beige walls and generic artwork creating an appropriately sterile environment for what was about to unfold. Terence Reynolds sat at the head of the table, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. To his right sat Patricia Flores from Human Resources, who had been summoned on short-notice legal pad ready. Aaliyah and Jasmine sat side by side, their expressions professional but resolute. Across from them, Rebecca Taylor stared at her hands, occasionally dabbing at her eyes. Blake Stevens sat slightly apart from her, as if physically distancing himself from the situation. Morgan Davis, the chief purser, stood near the door, her posture perfect even after the long flight. Outside, Harold Whitman waited on a bench, having volunteered to provide his account of the events. Willis Bradshaw had mysteriously disappeared into the terminal the moment the plane landed. I want to begin by offering my sincerest apologies. Terence began, his voice tight with controlled anger. What you experienced today is completely unacceptable and goes against everything Horizon Airways stands for. Rebecca looked up, tears threatening. Mr. Reynolds, if I could explain, Miss Taylor. Terence cut her off. You'll have your opportunity to speak. But first, I'd like to hear directly from Directors Washington and Bennett. Aaliyah opened her laptop, which contained her detailed notes. From the moment we boarded, there was a clear disparity in service. While other first-class passengers received immediate attention, we were ignored until we used the call button. Miss Taylor made multiple comments suggesting we didn't belong in first class, including suggesting we might be more comfortable in economy with others like us. That was taken out of context. Rebecca interjected desperately. Please don't interrupt, Patricia from HR said firmly. Jasmine continued where Aaliyah left off. When I opened my laptop to review some work documents, Miss Taylor accidentally spilled water on it during beverage service, damaging company property. When I requested an incident report, she became defensive, especially after I demonstrated knowledge of company procedures. And there was the issue with pre-departure beverages, Aaliyah added. Other passengers received them while we were told service would begin after takeoff. There was also preferential treatment during meal service, deliberate delays in responding to our requests, and what I can only describe as performative courtesy once Miss Taylor apparently realized who we were. Terence turned to Morgan. Miss Davis as chief purser. What did you observe? Morgan straightened. I didn't witness the entire interaction as I was primarily working in business class. However, when I came forward midway through the flight, I noticed distinct differences in how Miss Taylor interacted with Directors Washington and Bennett compared to other passengers. When I questioned her about it, she was evasive. After the captain's announcement identifying our executives, her behavior changed dramatically, becoming overly solicitous. And Mr. Stevens Terence asked. Blake cleared his throat nervously. I observed Miss Taylor's behavior. I should have said something earlier, and I accept responsibility for not intervening. That was wrong of me. It certainly was, Patricia noted, writing on her pad. Terence turned to Rebecca. Miss Taylor, you've been with Horizon Airways for 15 years. I've reviewed your file. While your performance evaluations have generally been positive, there are 3 previous passenger complaints regarding perceived bias, all filed by passengers of color. They were handled at the local level and never escalated to corporate. Would you like to respond to today's allegations? Rebecca's facade finally cracked. I'm not racist, she insisted, tears flowing freely now. I have black friends. I even dated a Hispanic man in college. Today was just, I was tired. We had a full cabin. Things got misinterpreted. Misinterpreted, Jasmine repeated coolly. Please explain how suggesting we would be more comfortable with others like us could be misinterpreted. I didn't mean it like that, Rebecca protested. I thought maybe you were friends with someone in economy. I was trying to be helpful. Harold Whitman, who had been called in to provide his statement, shook his head. That's not consistent with what I observed. The tone and context were clearly discriminatory. And it wasn't isolated. It was a pattern throughout the flight. Rebecca's tears turned angry. This isn't fair. 15 years of perfect service and one misunderstanding could end my career. What about all the good flights? What about all the passengers who love me? Miss Taylor. Aaliyah said quietly, "This isn't about one bad day. This is about a pattern of behavior that makes certain passengers feel unwelcome, based solely on their appearance. The fact that you're more concerned about your career than the harm you've caused speaks volumes." At that moment, Willis Bradshaw burst into the room, having been tracked down by airport security at Terran's request. "I'm here to speak on Rebecca's behalf," he announced without preamble. "She's an excellent flight attendant who always makes me feel welcome. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion." "And you are?" Patricia asked. "Willis Bradshaw, Executive Vice President at Meridian Financial. I'm a platinum flyer with Horizon." Mr. Bradshaw, Jasmine said, "Would you care to share with everyone what you said when you requested to be moved away from us?" Willis paused slightly. "I don't recall exactly." "Let me refresh your memory," Aaliyah said. "You told Miss Taylor that we didn't seem like we belonged up here and asked to be moved further from them. Those were your exact words." Willis straightened his tie uncomfortably. "Well, I simply prefer a quieter environment when I travel." And Mr. Whitman Terrence interrupted. Turning to Harold, "You were seated directly across from directors Washington and Bennett. Were they being disruptive in any way?" "Quite the opposite," Harold replied. "They were professional and composed throughout the flight, even when faced with obvious discrimination. If anyone was disruptive, it was Mr. Bradshaw, who made several audible comments about standards slipping in first class." Willis's face reened. "This is absurd. I'm taking my business elsewhere if this is how Horizon treats its loyal customers." "That's your prerogative, Mr. Bradshaw," Terrence replied coolly. "Horizon Airways is committed to providing respectful service to all our passengers, regardless of race, gender, or background. If that commitment doesn't align with your values, perhaps another airline would be a better fit." Aaliyah and Jasmine exchanged a subtle glance of approval. This was exactly the type of leadership they had hoped to see. Patricia from HR cleared her throat. "Based on the accounts we've heard and the company's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, I'm recommending immediate administrative leave for Miss Taylor. Pending a full investigation, Mr. Stevens will receive a formal warning for failing to intervene when witnessing discriminatory behavior. Miss Davis will be commended for her professional conduct and appropriate questioning of concerning behavior." Rebecca collapsed into fresh tears. "Please no. I can't lose this job. I'll do anything. Take a class, write an apology, whatever you need." Jasmine studied her for a long moment. "Miss Taylor, your immediate concern about losing your job, rather than understanding why your behavior was harmful, is telling. True change requires genuine recognition of the problem, not just fear of consequences." As Aaliyah watched Rebecca's reaction, she flashed back to countless similar moments throughout her career when people only recognized their prejudice when it threatened their own well-being, never considering the accumulated weight such interactions placed on those who experienced them daily. The meeting concluded with Rebecca being escorted to collect her belongings, her security badge temporarily deactivated. Blake left with a written warning and a mandatory registration for the company's upcoming bias training program. Morgan stayed behind to discuss her observations in more detail. As they left the conference room, Harold Whitman approached Aaliyah and Jasmine. "I just wanted to say what you're doing matters. My daughter-in-law faces this kind of thing all the time in her industry. People like you, willing to hold others accountable, are making her future better." "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," Aaliyah replied. "It's not always easy being the ones to speak up, but necessary," Jasmine added. "This isn't about one flight attendant. It's about changing a culture." As they walked toward the terminal exit, Terrence joining them, Aaliyah turned to Jasmine. "One down. Many more to go." Jasmine finished with a determined smile. They both knew this incident was just the beginning of the real work ahead. 1 week later, Rebecca Taylor sat rigidly in a chair outside the Human Resources Department at Horizon Airways headquarters in Chicago. The past 7 days had been the most stressful of her career. Administrative leave had given her plenty of time to reflect, though much of that reflection had centered on her own sense of injustice rather than the impact of her actions. She'd hired an employment attorney who sat beside her, now reviewing notes on his tablet. Remember, he advised in hushed tones, "Focus on your record of service. 15 years with only minor incidents. Emphasize that you've never received formal diversity training, so you couldn't have been expected to understand the nuances of these issues." Rebecca nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Those minor incidents her lawyer referred to, she remembered them clearly now. The Nigerian businessman whose drink order she had repeatedly forgotten. The Indian family she had accidentally skipped during meal service. The Latina executive whose first-class status she had questioned, demanding to see her boarding pass multiple times. At the time, she had dismissed the complaints as passengers being overly sensitive. Now, a pattern was emerging that even she couldn't ignore. Inside the conference room, Patricia Flores from HR reviewed Rebecca's complete employment file with Jasmine Bennett. They had spent the week conducting a thorough investigation, interviewing colleagues who had worked with Rebecca, and reviewing passenger complaints. "The pattern is clear," Patricia said, sliding a document across the table. 17 complaints in 15 years, 15 from passengers of color. Most were resolved with a form letter and miles credit. None triggered disciplinary action. Because they were handled individually without anyone looking at the pattern, Jasmine observed. Exactly. Our complaint system wasn't designed to identify repeated behavior from the same employee against a specific demographic. That's changing as of today. The door opened and Aaliyah Washington entered with Taryn Reynolds. "The passenger interviews are complete," she announced. "Mr. Whitman provided a detailed statement, and we reached out to other passengers from the flight. 3 more have come forward with accounts that corroborate what we experienced." Terence nodded grimly. "The evidence is overwhelming. Rebecca Taylor has demonstrated a persistent pattern of discriminatory behavior toward passengers of color. This isn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. Blake Stevens was called in next. Unlike Rebecca, he had spent the week in genuine reflection. His warning had been a wake-up call. "I've been thinking a lot about why I didn't speak up," he admitted. "I guess I was afraid of challenging someone more senior. Afraid of making waves. But that's no excuse. No, it isn't." Jasmine agreed. Bystander intervention is crucial for changing workplace culture. When good people stay silent, they become complicit. "I understand that now," Blake said. "I want to do better. Not just to keep my job, but because it's right." After Blake left, Morgan Davis arrived presenting additional observations from her years working alongside Rebecca. "Looking back, I can see the patterns. I addressed what I personally witnessed, but I should have connected the dots sooner. That's why we're implementing the new reporting system," Aaliyah explained. "It will flag patterns of behavior that might not be obvious from isolated incidents." "I'd like to be part of the solution," Morgan offered. "I've been with Horizon for 30 years. People respect me. If I take a strong stand on this, it could influence others." Finally, it was Rebecca's turn. She entered with her attorney, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. Miss Taylor Patricia began. "We've completed our investigation into the events of Flight 1427 and reviewed your employment history with Horizon Airways." Rebecca's attorney leaned forward. "My client has an exemplary service record spanning 15 years. Any misunderstandings on the flight in question must be viewed in the context of her overall performance." "We have viewed it in context," Terence replied firmly. "That's precisely the problem. When we examined Miss Taylor's history with Horizon, we found a consistent pattern of desperate treatment toward passengers of color." He slid the complaint summary across the table. Rebecca stared at it, the blood draining from her face as she recognized names and dates. "These were all resolved," she protested weakly. "No disciplinary action was ever taken because our system failed to identify the pattern," Aaliyah explained. "Each complaint was handled individually without connecting them to reveal the larger issue. That failure ends today." Rebecca's tears returned, but this time they seemed more genuine. "I never thought of myself as I didn't realize. That's part of the problem." Miss Taylor Jasmine said, "Discrimination isn't always about conscious hatred. Often it's about unconscious biases that affect how we treat others, but impact matters more than intent. Patricia slid another document across the table. Based on our findings, Horizon Airways is terminating your employment effective immediately. Rebecca's attorney immediately began arguing about wrongful termination, but Terence was prepared. In addition to Miss Taylor, we've identified 6 other flight attendants with similar patterns of behaviour. All are being terminated today. This isn't targeting one individual, it's addressing a systemic problem. As Rebecca and her attorney left to discuss their options, Willis Bradshaw arrived, having been summoned by Patricia. He strutted in confidently, apparently believing he was there to support Rebecca. Instead, Terence handed him a letter. Mr. Bradshaw, this formally notifies you that your platinum status with Horizon Airways has been revoked due to violations of our passenger code of conduct. Additionally, we're implementing a 3-year suspension of your frequent flyer account. You can't do this, Bradshaw exploded. Do you know how much money I spend with this airline? We value customers who treat our staff and fellow passengers with respect. Aaliyah replied calmly. That's worth more than any dollar amount. As Bradshaw stormed out threatening lawsuits, Harold Whitman was invited in. Unlike Bradshaw, he understood the significance of what was happening. You're actually doing it, he said, looking impressed, making real changes. This is just the beginning, Jasmine assured him. By the end of the day, news of the terminations had spread throughout the company. Some employees were shocked, others relieved. The media caught wind of the story, with headlines proclaiming, Horizon Airways takes bold stand against discrimination and black female executives transform airline culture. Industry analysts debated whether Horizon's actions would hurt or help their bottom line. But for Aaliyah and Jasmine, this wasn't about profits. It was about creating an environment where everyone was treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. That evening, as they debriefed in Aaliyah's hotel room, Jasmine reflected on the day's events. Do you think we made a difference? Aaliyah smiled tiredly. Today, yes. But we both know this is just one small step. The real work is changing the system that allowed this to happen in the first place. Jasmine nodded, understanding perfectly. They had won a battle, but the war for equality continued. The Horizon Airways headquarters in Chicago buzzed with anticipation. 1 week after the termination, CEO Lawrence Wilson had called a company-wide meeting to address what the media was now calling the first-class incident. The largest conference room was packed with department heads, regional managers, and key staff members. Others joined via video conference from airports across the country. Aaliyah and Jasmine sat near the front reviewing their presentation notes. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity as they'd worked to translate one incident into meaningful company-wide change. Lawrence Wilson approached the podium, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by serious determination. Thank you all for being here today, whether in person or virtually. I want to begin by acknowledging what many of you already know. Horizon Airways has failed to live up to our stated values of equality and respect for all passengers and employees. A murmur ran through the room. It was rare for a CEO to be so forthright about company failures. The incident on Flight 1427 was not an isolated event, but a symptom of deeper problems within our culture. Directors Washington and Bennett have completed a comprehensive investigation, and their findings are both troubling and enlightening. He gestured for Aaliyah to take the floor. She stood projecting the first slide of her presentation. Over the past week, we conducted an in-depth review of passenger complaints filed over the last 5 years, she began. What we found was a disturbing pattern. Passengers of color were 3 times more likely to report negative interactions with our crew than white passengers. However, their complaints were 50% less likely to result in any corrective action. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Moreover, Jasmine continued. When we anonymously surveyed our own staff, 62% of employees of color reported experiencing discrimination from colleagues or supervisors. Yet only 12% felt comfortable reporting these incidents through official channels. Lawrence returned to the podium. Let me be clear, this stops now. Today, we're announcing a comprehensive overhaul of our policies, training, and accountability systems. Terence Reynolds and Patricia Flores presented the first phase of changes, a new reporting system that would identify patterns of behaviour, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, and revised hiring practices to increase diversity at all levels of the company. Next, Jasmine unveiled her most significant contribution, the Horizon Inclusive Service Training Program, or HIT. This isn't your typical corporate diversity training, she explained. We're not just checking boxes here. This is an immersive, ongoing program that will fundamentally change how we interact with passengers and each other. The program would include role-playing scenarios, regular feedback sessions, and quarterly assessments. Most importantly, it would be developed and led by a diverse team of trainers with real-world experience dealing with discrimination. Completion of this training will be mandatory for continued employment, Jasmine emphasized, and leadership participation is non-negotiable. Change must start at the top. Aaliyah then introduced her own initiative, the Passenger Experience Reporting System, or PERS. Using technology developed in partnership with Harold Whitman's company, passengers would have access to a simple, anonymous way to report their experiences. The system will use AI to identify patterns while protecting individual privacy, she explained. It will also allow us to recognize and reward employees who provide exceptional, inclusive service. As the meeting progressed, Lawrence made another significant announcement. Horizon Airways had terminated a total of 7 flight attendants and 2 gate agents whose history showed consistent discriminatory behavior. Additionally, the company had revoked elite status from 12 frequent flyers who had repeatedly violated the passenger code of conduct. Some have suggested that these actions might hurt our bottom line, Lawrence acknowledged. To them, I say any customer or employee who doesn't share our commitment to treating everyone with dignity is a liability we cannot afford. The announcement received a standing ovation from most attendees, though some remained seated, their expressions uncertain or resistant. After the meeting, Aaliyah and Jasmine found themselves approached by a group of flight attendants of color led by a young black woman named Destiny Robinson. I just wanted to say, "Thank you," Destiny said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been with Horizon for 3 years and I've experienced so many of the same things you documented. I was starting to think it would never change." "It's why we're here," Jasmine replied, squeezing her hand. "Not just to have these titles, but to use them to make real change." Later that day, they received an unexpected call from the CEO of United Continental Airlines, followed by similar calls from executives at Delta and American. Their actions had sent shockwaves through the industry, prompting other airlines to examine their own practices. The media coverage continued, with industry publications analyzing the potential impact of Horizon's bold moves. Some predicted financial losses as disgruntled customers took their business elsewhere. Others suggested the company would ultimately benefit from increased loyalty among diverse customers and employees. Aaliyah and Jasmine paid little attention to these predictions. They were too busy doing the work. As they reflected on the week's events in Jasmine's office, they thought back to their college days, studying together in the Stanford Library until dawn. "Remember when Professor Hargrove told me I might be more comfortable in communications instead of business strategy," Aaliyah recalled. "Said I didn't have the analytical mind for it." Jasmine laughed. "And now you're redesigning the customer experience analytics for a major airline." "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Aaliyah said more seriously. "When we accepted these positions, we talked about the weight of representation, about being the first and often only in rooms full of executives." "It's worth it, though," Jasmine replied. For moments like today, for people like Destiny, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Morgan Davis, the chief purser from Flight 1427. "Directors, do you have a moment?" she asked. "I have something important to discuss." They welcomed her and curious about her visit. "I've been thinking about my role in all this," Morgan began. "I've been with Horizon for 30 years. I've seen a lot of changes, some good, some not so good. But what happened on that flight? It made me realize I've been standing by when I should have been standing up." She straightened her shoulders. "I'd like to help with the new training program. With my experience, I think I could be an effective advocate for change, especially with the older crew members who might be resistant. Jasmine smiled warmly. We would welcome your involvement, Morgan. Change is most effective when it comes from within the existing culture, not just imposed from outside. As Morgan left, Aaliyah checked her phone and found an email from Harold Whitman. His company was offering to develop custom software for Horizon's new reporting system at a substantially reduced rate. Paying it forward, his email explained, "My daughter-in-law faces these battles every day. Your courage is making her path a little easier." The ripple effects of Flight 1427 were spreading far beyond what either of them had anticipated. What had begun as a single incident of discrimination was transforming into a movement for change, not just within Horizon Airways, but throughout the industry. As Aaliyah and Jasmine prepared for another day of meetings, they knew the work ahead would be challenging. Policies could be changed overnight, but attitudes and behaviors would take longer. There would be resistance backlash, and days when it would feel like they were making no progress at all. But they had each other. And now they were building a coalition of allies throughout the company and beyond. The system that had allowed Rebecca Taylor to discriminate with impunity for 15 years was being dismantled piece by piece. It was just the beginning. 6 months after the incident on Flight 1427, Horizon Airways headquarters was transformed. The previously sterile lobby now featured a vibrant mural celebrating diversity in aviation. Commissioned from a renowned black artist, photos of employees from all backgrounds lined the hallways alongside the company's new mission statement, connecting people with dignity and respect in the air and on the ground. Today was a momentous occasion, the graduation ceremony for the first class of flight attendants trained under Jasmine's heist program. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as family members, executives, and media representatives gathered for the event. Jasmine stood backstage reviewing her speech notes. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of her career. Implementing systemic change had meant long hours, difficult conversations, and occasionally standing firm against powerful resistance. Ready Aaliyah appeared beside her elegant, in a tailored blue suit. "As I'll ever be," Jasmine replied with a smile. "How's the new system performing?" Aaliyah's eyes lit up. Beyond expectations. The data from the first quarter shows a 78% reduction in discrimination-related complaints, and employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Harold's team really delivered on the software. Harold Whitman had indeed become an invaluable partner. What began as custom reporting software had evolved into a comprehensive suite of tools for tracking, analyzing, and improving customer experience across all demographics. Several other airlines had already licensed the technology, creating an unexpected industry standard. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the ceremony. Lawrence Wilson took the stage first, welcoming the audience and reflecting on the company's transformation. 6 months ago, Horizon Airways faced a pivotal moment. He began, "We could have treated what happened on Flight 1427 as an isolated incident, disciplined a few individuals, and continued business as usual. Instead, guided by the wisdom and courage of our executive directors, we chose to recognize it as a symptom of deeper issues and commit to meaningful change." He introduced Jasmine, who approached the podium to enthusiastic applause. "When we designed the Horizon Inclusive Service Training Program, we knew it wouldn't be easy," she began. "We weren't interested in performative workshops that checked boxes but changed nothing. We wanted to create a genuinely transformative experience." She gestured to the graduating class, a visibly diverse group of 30 men and women. These incredible individuals didn't just complete a training program. They embarked on a journey of self-reflection and growth. They learned to recognize their own biases, to understand the experiences of those different from themselves, and to provide service that honors the dignity of every passenger. Among the graduates sat Morgan Davis, who had become one of the program's most effective trainers. Her decades of experience and respected status had made her an influential advocate for change, particularly among veteran crew members. "I'm especially proud that this program wasn't imposed from above," Jasmine continued. It was developed collaboratively, incorporating insights from employees at every level of our organization. Because true change isn't about mandates. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels responsible for making Horizon Airways a place where all are welcomed and respected. After Jasmine's speech, Aaliyah took the stage to present her own initiative's results. The passenger experience reporting system had generated invaluable data that informed everything from scheduling to training to aircraft design. The numbers tell a powerful story, Aaliyah explained, displaying a series of graphs. When passengers feel respected and valued, regardless of their background, they're more likely to choose Horizon Airways again. Our customer loyalty metrics have increased by 34% among passengers of color, and overall satisfaction scores have risen across all demographics. What she didn't mention explicitly, but what the executives in the room understood clearly, was that these improvements had translated to financial success. Despite dire predictions from some analysts, Horizon's revenues had increased by 12% over the previous quarter. The company was literally profiting from its commitment to equality. Following the executive presentations, the graduates received their wings. Each one had a story. Some were new to aviation, others were veteran employees who had embraced the opportunity to grow. All had committed to creating a more inclusive environment for passengers and colleagues alike. A young black woman named Destiny Robinson, whom Malaya and Jasmine had met after the company-wide meeting 6 months ago, was selected to speak on behalf of the graduating class. When I joined Horizon Airways 3 years ago, I was told by a senior colleague to keep my head down and not make waves, she began. I understood what that meant. Don't challenge the status quo. Don't speak up about discrimination. Don't expect things to change. She looked directly at Aaliyah and Jasmine. Then these two remarkable women showed us all what happens when you refuse to keep your head down. They didn't just change policies, they changed what we believe is possible. After the ceremony, a reception was held in the company atrium. As Aaliyah and Jasmine mingled with graduates and executives, they were approached by a familiar face, Harold Whitman, accompanied by a young black woman. Directors, I'd like you to meet my daughter-in-law, Dr. Kimberly Whitman, Harold said proudly. She's just been appointed Chief of Neurosurgery at Massachusetts General. It's an honor to meet you both, Dr. Whitman said warmly. Harold has told me about your work, and I've been following Horizon's transformation closely. It's inspiring to see what you've accomplished. The feeling is mutual, Jasmine replied sincerely. Breaking barriers in neurosurgery, that's truly remarkable. We all fight the same battles in different arenas. Dr. Whitman observed, what you've done here creates ripples far beyond aviation. It changes what people believe is possible, what they come to expect. As the reception continued, Aaliyah and Jasmine found a quiet moment together near the window overlooking the airport runways. 6 months ago, did you imagine we'd be here? Aaliyah asked. Jasmine watched a Horizon Airways plane take off its wings, catching the late afternoon sunlight. Honestly, yes and no. I believed we could make change, but the scale of it, that's been beyond my expectations. Mine too. Aaliyah admitted, though, we still have so far to go. The reflection was interrupted by a young flight attendant trainee, a black woman named Zoe Franklin, who approached them hesitantly. Directors, I'm sorry to intrude, but I just wanted to thank you personally. Before Horizon's changes, I wouldn't have considered a career in aviation. Growing up, I never saw people who looked like me in these roles. You've changed that for girls like me. After Zoe left, Jasmine turned to Aaliyah with a smile. That's why we do this. That's exactly why Aaliyah agreed. 2 weeks later, they found themselves on another Horizon Airways flight again in first class, but this time openly wearing their executive credentials. The difference in service was immediate and striking. Good morning, Director. Washington, Director Bennett. The flight attendant greeted them warmly. Welcome aboard. Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Throughout the flight, they observed crew members providing consistently excellent service to all passengers, regardless of appearance or background. What had once seemed exceptional was becoming the norm. Progress, Jasmine murmured as they prepared for landing. One flight at a time, Aaliyah agreed. As the plane touched down, they exchanged a glance filled with determination. The incident on Flight 1427 had been a catalyst for change, but it was only the beginning. There would be new challenges, new resistance, new opportunities to transform not just Horizon Airways, but the industry as a whole. They were ready. "The work continues," Jasmine said quietly. "Always," Aaliyah replied. "But now, we're not doing it alone." And they weren't. Behind them was a growing coalition of allies and advocates from the sea-white to the cabin crew. People like Morgan and Destiny and Zoe. People who had seen what was possible when discrimination was confronted directly and systemic change was embraced wholeheartedly. The path ahead would not be easy. Real transformation never was. But as they walked together through the terminal, Aaliyah and Jasmine carried with them the knowledge that their actions had already created meaningful change and countless lives. Sometimes transformation begins with a single moment when someone who has been underestimated steps into their power and says no more. For Jasmine Bennett and Aaliyah Washington, that moment had come at 3,000 FT in the first-class cabin of Flight 1427. For Horizon Airways, it had launched a journey toward becoming the kind of company they had always claimed to be. For the aviation industry, it had set a new standard of accountability and inclusion. And for passengers everywhere, it meant the possibility of traveling with dignity regardless of who they were or what they looked like. This story illustrates that meaningful change requires more than addressing individual incidents of racism. It demands systemic transformation. When Aaliyah and Jasmine encountered discrimination, they didn't just seek consequences for Rebecca. They recognized the opportunity to overhaul an entire corporate culture. True leadership means using power to create spaces where everyone is treated with dignity by implementing new reporting systems, training programs, and accountability measures. They transformed a moment of discrimination into lasting institutional change. The story also demonstrates the ripple effects of courageous action. When leaders take a stand against racism, it empowers others to speak up, creates new opportunities for marginalized groups, and sets new industry standards. Perhaps most importantly, the narrative highlights how racism often manifests in subtle, everyday interactions rather than just overt acts. Rebecca's microaggressions had accumulated over years, causing real harm while remaining just below the threshold for intervention. By recognizing these patterns, Horizon Airways created a more inclusive environment where excellence means serving everyone with equal respect. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in a public setting? How did you respond? Comment below with your experiences and what you might do differently after hearing this story. If this narrative resonated with you, please hit the like button to help it reach others who need this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming adversity and creating positive change. Share this video with someone who's working to make their workplace more inclusive. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept the status quo. Together, we can transform moments of injustice into catalysts for change.